I am 28 years old, a woman who had always believed in the quiet strength of love. My husband, Mark, who is 30, had always been my rock, the calm center of my world. We had dated for 5 years before he proposed. 5 years of what I thought was perfect understanding and mutual respect. His family was a different story. His father, Robert, was a quiet man who deferred to his wife in all things. His mother, Eleanor, was a woman who wore her love for her son like a heavy, ornate cloak, one she never took off, even when it was suffocating. She saw me not as a partner for her son, but as a rival for his affection, a thief in the night stealing her most prized possession. The wedding planning had been a battleground of passive aggression and emotional manipulation. Eleanor had opinions on everything, from the color of the napkins to the vows we would exchange. Each suggestion I made was met with a tight smile and a comment about how she, as Mark's mother, knew what was truly best for him. Mark, bless his heart, tried to mediate. He would listen to her, then listen to me, and try to find a compromise that left everyone feeling a little bit wronged. I went along with it for the sake of peace, telling myself that once we were married, things would change. We would be our own family, and her influence would naturally wane. I was so naive. The day of our wedding arrived, a bright, sunny afternoon that felt full of promise. I stood across from Mark, looking into his eyes, and for a moment, the world and all its complications melted away. It was just us. The officiant was speaking, the words a gentle hum in the background. My heart was so full I thought it might burst. And then, from the front row, a sound pierced the bubble of our happiness. It was a sob, loud and theatrical, designed to draw attention. It was Eleanor. Her face was a mask of tragedy, tears streaming down her cheeks. She clutched a lace handkerchief to her chest as if she were about to faint. Robert sat beside her, patting her hand awkwardly, his expression one of weary resignation. A murmur went through the guests. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. This was my wedding day, a moment that was supposed to be about love and commitment, and she was turning it into a spectacle about her own supposed loss. The officiant paused, uncertain how to proceed. I looked at Mark, my eyes pleading with him to do something, to say something. He gave me a small, reassuring squeeze of the hand, but his jaw was tight. Then Eleanor's voice, trembling with manufactured grief, cut through the silence. "I'm losing my only son," she wailed, loud enough for everyone in the chapel to hear. The words hung in the air, a poison dart aimed directly at my heart. She was painting me as the villain, the woman who was tearing her family apart. I felt myself start to tremble, a mix of anger and humiliation churning in my stomach. This was it. This was the line she had crossed, turning our sacred moment into a public performance of her victimhood. I expected Mark to be angry, to be embarrassed, to tell her to be quiet. But instead, he turned slightly toward her, his voice low but firm, carrying in the hushed space. "Mom, not now," he said. And then he added the words that would change everything. "We'll talk about the agreement later." The agreement. The word landed in my mind with a thud. What agreement? My confusion must have shown on my face because Mark turned back to me, his eyes giving nothing away. He gave a slight nod to the officiant, who, after a moment's hesitation, cleared his throat and continued with the ceremony. The rest of the vows passed in a blur. I said "I do" on autopilot, my mind racing, replaying Mark's words over and over. An agreement. What had he agreed to? And why was it connected to his mother's public display of sorrow? The reception was a nightmare. Eleanor, having had her moment of drama, was now playing the part of the gracious mother of the groom. She glided from table to table, accepting condolences from guests as if she were at a funeral instead of a wedding. People would pat her arm and say things like, "It must be so hard to let him go," and she would sigh and say, "A mother's love is a sacrifice." I wanted to scream. I felt like an intruder at my own party. I tried to talk to Mark, to pull him aside and ask him what he meant, but he was constantly being pulled away by well-wishers. When we finally had our first dance, I whispered in his ear, "Mark, what agreement were you talking about?" He held me tighter, his cheek against mine. "It's nothing, Sarah," he murmured. "Just something I said to calm her down. You know how she gets. Let's not talk about it tonight. Let's just enjoy this." But I couldn't enjoy it. The word echoed in my head, a discordant note in the symphony of our wedding day. An agreement. It felt heavy, secretive. I plastered a smile on my face for the rest of the night, going through the motions of cutting the cake and tossing the bouquet. But my heart wasn't in it. I felt a small, cold knot of dread forming in the pit of my stomach. The life I thought I was starting felt like it was built on a foundation I didn't understand, with a secret room I hadn't been told about. As we drove away from the reception, waving to our friends and family, I looked back and saw Eleanor standing there, a triumphant little smile on her face. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever this agreement was, it was not nothing. It was everything. The first week of our marriage was spent on a beautiful beach, but a shadow hung over our honeymoon. I tried to push the thought of the agreement away, to believe Mark when he said it was nothing. But every time he was quiet for too long, or every time he checked his phone with a flicker of anxiety in his eyes, the suspicion returned. Eleanor's behavior following the wedding was also strange. She called Mark every day, but her tone was different. It wasn't the usual cloying, possessive tone. It was businesslike. And when she spoke to me, she was almost sickeningly sweet, calling me daughter in a way that felt more like a brand than a term of endearment. On our last day of the honeymoon, I couldn't hold it in any longer. We were sitting on the balcony of our hotel room watching the sunset. "Mark, we need to talk about what you said at the wedding," I began, my voice quiet but firm. He sighed, not looking at me. "Sarah, I told you it was just a way to manage her. Can we please just drop it?" "No, I can't drop it," I said, my voice rising slightly. It felt like more than that. The way she stopped crying immediately, the way she's been acting since. It's like you two have a secret, and I'm not a part of it. We're married now. There shouldn't be any secrets. He finally turned to look at me, his expression a mixture of frustration and something else. Guilt. "It's a family matter," he said evasively. "I am your family now," I countered. His words stung. He was already drawing a line between me and his family matters. It felt like a betrayal. "Whatever involves you and your mother involves me now, too. What is the agreement, Mark?" He stood up and walked to the railing, his back to me. "It's about money, okay? I help her out financially. It's something we've always done. It's no big deal." This didn't make sense. I knew for a fact that Robert and Eleanor were financially comfortable. Robert had a generous pension, and they owned their house outright. They weren't extravagant people. "Help her out how?" I pressed. "Why would she need financial help?" "She just does," he said sharply. "She worries about the future. I give her some money every month to help her feel secure. It's a private arrangement between us." A private arrangement. The words felt like a slap. He was my husband, and he had a secret financial arrangement with his mother that he had never mentioned in the 5 years we were together. "How much money?" I asked, my voice trembling now. He hesitated. "It's not important." "It is important," I insisted. "We have a joint account now, Mark. Our finances are shared. I have a right to know." He finally exploded. "Why are you making this such a big deal? Are you worried about the money? Is that it?" "I didn't think you were like that, Sarah." His accusation hurt more than the secrecy. He was twisting it, making me sound greedy and materialistic when all I wanted was honesty. "This isn't about the money," I said, my voice cold. "It's about the trust. You lied to me. You kept this from me. For how long?" He wouldn't answer. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words and broken trust. The beautiful sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. But all I could feel was the cold, gray reality of my marriage. Mark had a secret he was willing to fight to protect, even from me. And his mother was at the center of it. The honeymoon was over. The real work, the work of uncovering the truth, was just beginning. When we returned home, the tension between us was a palpable thing. We moved around each other carefully, like two strangers sharing a house. The joy and intimacy of our new marriage had been replaced by suspicion and silence. I knew I couldn't let it go. Mark's defensiveness had only confirmed my fears that this agreement was something significant. I needed to know what I was up against. My best friend Chloe came over a few days after we got back. She had been my maid of honor, and she had a front row seat to Eleanor's wedding performance. As I made us tea, she watched me with concerned eyes. "You seem off," she said gently. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated for a moment. Then the whole story came pouring out. The scene at the wedding, Mark's strange comment, the fight on our honeymoon, the secret financial arrangement. Chloe listened patiently, her expression growing more and more grim. "Wow," she said when I finished. "That is a whole new level of manipulative. Theatrically crying at the ceremony was bad enough, but a secret money deal? What is wrong with her?" "I don't know," I confessed, sinking onto the couch. "And what's worse is that Mark is defending it. He's making me feel like I'm the bad guy for even asking." "Of course he is," Chloe said, her voice sharp. "He's been conditioned his whole life to put her feelings first. She's been playing this game with him for 30 years, Sarah. You've only been in the picture for 5. She paused, then looked at me seriously. "Did you notice how she looked after her little outburst? Right after Mark said that thing about the agreement?" I thought back. I don't know, I was so focused on trying not to burst into tears myself. "I was watching her," Chloe said. "She stopped crying instantly. It was like a switch flipped. And for the rest of the night, she had this little smirk on her face, like she'd won something. It was creepy." Chloe's observation confirmed my own unsettling memory of Eleanor's triumphant smile as we drove away. This wasn't about grief or loss. This was about power. It was a transaction. "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling helpless. "He won't tell me anything." "You need to find out for yourself," Chloe said practically. "You share finances now, right? You have a right to see the bank statements. You need to know exactly how much he's giving her and how often." The idea of snooping on my own husband made me feel sick. It felt like a violation of the trust I so desperately wanted to rebuild. But what choice did I have? He had already violated that trust by keeping this secret. If I wanted to understand the full scope of the problem, I had to get information on my own. It felt like a terrible first step in a marriage, but I knew Chloe was right. I had to protect myself. I had to know the truth. That night, after Mark was asleep, I quietly opened his laptop. My hands were shaking as I navigated to our new joint bank account portal. I felt like a criminal, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath and logged in. I scrolled through the transaction history, my eyes scanning for any transfers to Eleanor. I didn't see any recent ones. Maybe he hadn't sent the money for this month yet. Then I switched to his personal account, the one he'd had before we merged our finances. The password was the name of his childhood dog. I felt another pang of guilt, but I pushed it down. I scrolled back, month after month, year after year. And then I saw it. A recurring monthly transfer. Labeled family support. The amount made my breath catch in my throat. It was a staggering sum, nearly a quarter of his monthly take-home pay. For years, he had been sending his mother enough money to cover a mortgage payment on a nice house. My mind reeled. This wasn't just helping her out. This was a serious, long-term financial commitment. A commitment he had never once mentioned to me. While we had been saving for a down payment on a house, a significant portion of his income was being secretly diverted to his mother. I felt a wave of nausea. The lies, the sheer scale of the deception. It was overwhelming. I was about to close the laptop when an email notification popped up in the corner of the screen. It was from Eleanor. The subject line was reminder. My curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on it. The email was short and to the point. Mark, darling, just a gentle reminder about the first post-nuptial payment. As per our agreement, the new amount is due on the 1st. I'm so looking forward to our new arrangement. Love, Mom. Post-nuptial payment. New amount. The words swam before my eyes. The payment increased after we got married. My marriage, my commitment to Mark, had triggered a pay raise for his mother. The cold dread in my stomach solidified into a block of ice. This was so much worse than I had imagined. This wasn't just support. This was a payment for her son, and I had just increased his value. I closed the laptop, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked back to our bedroom and looked at Mark, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the fact that our marriage was a house of cards built on his lies. The man I loved, the man I had committed my life to, had a secret life, a secret obligation that put his mother's financial demands above our shared future. The anger I felt was cold and sharp. The time for hurt and confusion was over. Now it was time for answers, and I was going to get them one way or another. The next day, I confronted him. I waited until he was getting ready for work, a time when he couldn't easily run away from the conversation. I stood in the doorway of the bathroom, my arms crossed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I saw the bank statements, Mark, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. And I saw the email from your mother. He froze, his hand halfway to his face with a razor. He slowly turned to look at me, his eyes wide with shock and then hardening with anger. You went through my things? You spied on me. You lied to me. I shot back, my voice rising. You've been giving your mother thousands of dollars every month for years and never told me. And it gets worse now that we're married? What is going on, Mark? What is this agreement? He put the razor down, his face pale. I told you it's a family matter. It's none of your business. It became my business when you used money that should have been going toward our future to fund her lifestyle, I said, stepping into the bathroom. It became my business when my marriage was used as a justification to increase the payments. I am your wife. I deserve the truth. You don't understand, he said, his voice pleading now. It's complicated. Then uncomplicate it for me, I demanded. Tell me why. Why does she need that much money? You told me she was financially secure? He ran a hand through his hair, looking trapped. She made a lot of sacrifices for me, he stammered. When my dad's business struggled years ago, she used her inheritance to keep us afloat. She feels like she's owed something for that. She gave up a lot for me. The story sounded plausible on the surface, but it didn't sit right with me. Robert's business had been stable for as long as I'd known them. And even if she had helped out years ago, this felt less like repayment and more like extortion. So this is a debt? You're repaying a debt? Sort of, he said, not meeting my eyes. It's an arrangement we have. It keeps her happy. It keeps the peace. It keeps the peace for you, Mark, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. But it's destroying us. The secret is a poison in our marriage. Did you ever plan on telling me? He looked down at the floor. I don't know, he admitted quietly. I knew you wouldn't understand. You didn't give me a chance to understand, I said, the hurt fresh and raw. You made a choice to deceive me. You stood at that altar and made vows to me, all while knowing you had this huge secret obligation to your mother. What else are you hiding from me? Nothing, he insisted, looking up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate sincerity. This is it, I swear. It's just this one thing. But I didn't believe him. The trust was shattered. This one thing was so monumental, so fundamentally dishonest, that it called everything else into question. I need to see the agreement, I said, my voice firm. The actual document. I want to read what you signed. He looked horrified. There's no document, he lied, his eyes darting away from mine. Don't lie to me again, Mark, I warned. My patience gone. Your mother's email mentioned the agreement. There is a document. I want to see it. Tonight. He stared at me for a long moment, a silent battle raging in his eyes. He was trapped between his wife and his mother, between the past and the future. Finally, with a look of utter defeat, he nodded. Fine, he whispered. I'll show you. I felt no victory, only a profound sadness. I had to force the truth out of my husband, a man who was supposed to be my partner. The foundation of our marriage was cracking, and I was terrified that when I finally saw the full truth, it would crumble completely. That evening, the air in our home was thick with unspoken resentment. We ate dinner in silence, the clinking of our forks the only sound. After we finished, Mark went into his home office and came back with a heavy file folder. He placed it on the dining room table between us as if it were a bomb. My hand trembled as I reached for it. Inside was a professionally drafted legal document. The title at the top read, Familial Support and Legacy Agreement. My blood ran cold. This was far more formal and serious than I had ever imagined. I began to read, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. Mark sat across from me, his head in his hands, not saying a word. The document was a labyrinth of clauses and subclauses, but the core of it was horrifyingly simple. It stipulated that Mark, in recognition of the unquantifiable emotional, physical, and domestic labor provided by his mother, Eleanor, during his upbringing, would provide her with a monthly stipend for the rest of her life. The amount was listed, the same staggering sum I had seen on his bank statements. Then I got to the clause that made my stomach turn. Upon the event of the party of the second parts, Mark's legal marriage, it read, the monthly stipend shall be increased by 50% to compensate the party of the first part, Eleanor, for the diminution of emotional access and the increased maternal advisory burden associated with her son's new marital state. I had to read it 3 times to fully process the insanity. She was charging him more because he got married. She had monetized her own son's happiness. The maternal advisory burden? She was billing him for the unsolicited advice she was now entitled to give me. And diminution of emotional access? She was making him pay because his time and affection were now shared. It was the most narcissistic, manipulative thing I had ever seen. It was emotional blackmail codified into a contract. I looked at the last page. There were 2 signatures, bold and clear, Eleanor's and Mark's. It was dated just before our engagement. He had signed this, agreed to these terms before he even asked me to be his wife. I looked up at him, my voice barely a whisper. You signed this? You agreed to this? He wouldn't look at me. I didn't have a choice. He mumbled into his hands. She said if I didn't, she would feel like her whole life as a mother was a waste. She said it was the only way she could feel secure, knowing I truly valued her. This isn't about value, Mark. I slammed the document down on the table, my control finally snapping. This is about control. She has put a price tag on her love for you, and you are paying it. With our money. With our future. It was my money before we got married, he argued weakly. And now it's our money, I retorted. We are a partnership, or at least I thought we were. But it seems you have a primary partner you forgot to mention. I stood up, my whole body shaking with a rage so profound it scared me. Her performance at the wedding, it all makes sense now. It wasn't about losing a son. It was a public justification for cashing in on him. She was playing the victim so no one would question her right to be paid. He finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. What do you want me to do, Sarah? It's a legal contract. I signed it. I want you to be my husband, I said, my voice breaking. I want you to choose me, to choose us, over this sick, twisted arrangement. He just stared at me, his face a canvas of misery and indecision. He was a man who had been manipulated his entire life, and he didn't know how to break free. The contract wasn't just on paper. It was written on his soul. and I realized with a sinking heart that he couldn't fight this alone. And I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to fight it for him. The betrayal was too deep. The document on the table wasn't just a contract. It was proof that the man I married belonged to his mother, and I was just a costly accessory. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, the space between Mark and me feeling like a vast, empty canyon. Every time he shifted in his sleep, I flinched. The man beside me felt like a stranger, a co-conspirator in a scheme against our own marriage. The anger from earlier had cooled into a hard, cold resolve. This was not just a marital spat. This was a fundamental threat to my life, my future, and my sanity. The next morning, I packed a small bag. When Mark came into the kitchen, his eyes puffy from a sleepless night, he saw the bag by the door and his face fell. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I'm going to stay with Chloe for a few days," I said calmly. I had rehearsed this. I would not cry. I would not scream. I would be in control. "I need some space to think, and you need to decide, Mark. You need to decide who you are married to, me or your mother and her contract." "Sarah, don't do this," he pleaded, reaching for my hand. I pulled it away. "I'm not the one doing this, Mark," I said, my voice like ice. "You did this when you signed that paper. You did this every month when you made that payment in secret. You did this when you lied to my face. You have a choice to make. You can either be a son who pays his mother a lifetime subscription fee, or you can be a husband who builds a life with his wife. You can't be both. Let me know when you've made your decision." With that, I walked out the door, not looking back. The short drive to Chloe's apartment felt like an escape. As soon as she opened the door and saw my face, she pulled me into a hug. I finally let the tears come, sobbing into her shoulder for all the broken promises and shattered dreams. I told her everything, showing her the pictures I had taken of the contract on my phone. She read through them, her expression shifting from disbelief to pure fury. "This is insane," she breathed, scrolling through the images. "This isn't a contract. It's a hostage note. She's holding his love for her ransom. And he's paying it," I whispered. "He thinks he's bound by it." "Is he?" Chloe asked, looking up from the phone. "Is this thing even legally enforceable? It seems like something a lawyer would laugh out of court. Emotional advisory burden? Give me a break." Her question sparked something in my mind. Mark had just assumed it was an ironclad legal document because it looked official and was drafted by a lawyer. Eleanor had certainly presented it that way. But what if it wasn't? What if there was a loophole? A way out? A new kind of energy started to replace my despair. An idea was forming. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for Mark to hopefully develop a spine. I was going to fight back. I was going to find out just how legal this agreement really was. "I need to see a lawyer," I said, my voice stronger now. "Not just any lawyer. I need a family lawyer who specializes in this kind of high-conflict nonsense." Chloe grinned, a fierce, protective light in her eyes. "Now you're talking," she said. "Let's find you a shark." The next few days were a blur of research and phone calls. Chloe helped me find a highly recommended family law attorney, a woman named Ms. Diaz, who was known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude. I made an appointment, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. This felt like a huge step, a step that could either save my marriage or end it for good. While I waited for the appointment, I had to deal with the fallout from leaving. Mark called and texted constantly, swinging between desperate apologies and frustrated accusations that I was overreacting. I kept my responses brief and consistent. "Have you made a decision?" Then Eleanor called. I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was a masterpiece of passive aggression. "Sarah, darling," her syrupy voice began. "Mark tells me you've gone to stay with your friend. I do hope everything is all right. Sometimes new brides get a bit overwhelmed. Just remember that marriage is about compromise. I'm sure whatever little disagreement you've had, you two can work it out. Family is everything, after all. Her words were dripping with condescension and a veiled threat. I'm in charge here. Don't rock the boat. It only strengthened my resolve. She wasn't just a manipulative mother-in-law. She was my adversary, and I was done playing defense. The day of my appointment with Ms. Diaz, I dressed in my most professional outfit. I felt like I was preparing for battle. I brought copies of the agreement and a summary of the situation. I sat in her office, a sleek, modern space that felt both intimidating and reassuring. Ms. Diaz was a woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. She listened without interruption as I laid out the entire story, from the wedding outburst to the discovery of the contract. She read the document carefully, her expression unreadable. When she was finished, she looked up at me over her glasses. "Well, Mrs. Evans," she said, her voice dry. "In 25 years of practicing family law, I have seen some truly creative attempts at financial and emotional manipulation. But this is a work of art." My heart sank. "So it's legally binding? There's nothing I can do?" She leaned back in her chair. "Oh, it's a contract, all right. It's signed. A court would recognize it as a civil agreement between two consenting adults, your husband and his mother." She saw the despair on my face and held up a hand. "However," she continued, a small smile playing on her lips, "the person who drafted this was either very clever or very sloppy, and I suspect it's the latter." She pointed to a paragraph on the third page, a section I had glossed over, thinking it was just standard legal boilerplate. "Read this clause right here," she said. I leaned forward and read the words she was pointing to. "This agreement and all financial obligations therein is contingent upon the full and transparent disclosure of its terms to any future legal spouse of the party of the second part. Mark. Said spouse must provide written, notarized consent to the agreement's terms within 90 days of the legal date of marriage. Failure to secure said consent will render the agreement and all future obligations null and void." I stared at the words, my mind struggling to catch up. I looked up at Ms. Diaz, my eyes wide. "What does this mean?" "It means," she said, her smile widening, "that your mother-in-law overplayed her hand. She wanted to make sure her little contract was protected from a new wife coming in and challenging it. So she had her lawyer add a clause that essentially requires you to sign off on it. She probably assumed your husband would present it to you as a non-negotiable part of the marriage, and you would be pressured into signing. But he didn't. He hid it from you." "So," I started, my voice trembling with hope. "So if I don't sign it, the entire agreement becomes worthless," she finished for me. "You have been married for how long?" I did the math quickly. 67 days. "Then you have 23 days left," Ms. Diaz said, leaning forward. 23 days until this contract self-destructs. All you have to do is nothing." A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. I had a weapon, a powerful one. The very document that was meant to control me was now my key to freedom. "Now," Ms. Diaz said, her tone shifting to one of strategy. "The question is, how do you want to play this? You can simply run out the clock. In 23 days, the contract is void, and you can inform your husband and his mother of that fact. Or you can use this leverage." I thought of Eleanor's smug face, her condescending voicemail, her lifetime of manipulation. Just voiding the contract wasn't enough. She needed to be exposed. She needed to face a consequence for what she had done to Mark, and to me. She had built her entire identity around being the perfect, self-sacrificing mother. It was time for everyone to see the truth. "I want to use it," I said, my voice hard as steel. "I don't just want out. I want justice." Ms. Diaz nodded slowly, a look of approval in her eyes. "Good," she said. "Then let's make a plan." I walked out of that lawyer's office feeling like a different person. The fear and sadness had been burned away, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. I had the power now. Eleanor and Mark didn't know that I knew about the 90-day clause. They thought I was just the emotional, hysterical wife who had run away from a problem she couldn't handle. They had no idea that a clock was ticking down on their dirty little secret. My first step was to go back home. I couldn't execute my plan from Chloe's couch. I needed to be on the inside. When I let myself into the house, Mark was sitting in the living room, looking lost. He jumped up when he saw me. "Sarah, you're back." "I'm back," I said, my tone neutral. I couldn't let him see the shift in me. I had to play the part of the wounded wife a little longer. "But nothing has changed, Mark. We still have a problem that needs to be solved." "I know," he said, his voice full of remorse. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. You were right. It's not fair to you. I want to fix this. I'm going to talk to her. I'm going to try to renegotiate." I had to suppress a bitter laugh. Renegotiate. He still didn't get it. He thought this was a business deal that could be tweaked. He didn't see it for the emotional prison it was. But his willingness to even try was a start. It was also a perfect opening for my plan. "Okay," I said, feigning weary resignation. "You can try to talk to her, but I don't think you understand what you're up against." "I have to try," he insisted. "For us." Over the next week, I watched as Mark attempted to renegotiate with his mother. It was painful. He would call her, and I would listen to his side of the conversation. It was a masterclass in her manipulative tactics. He would start strong, saying things like, "Mom, we need to talk about the agreement. The amount is putting a strain on me and Sarah." Her response, which I could guess from his pained replies, would be a torrent of guilt. "A strain? After everything I've done for you? I sacrificed my best years for you, Mark. I thought you valued that. I guess I was wrong. I suppose I'll just have to sell the house and move into a tiny apartment. Don't worry about your old mother." He would immediately backpedal. "No, Mom, that's not what I'm saying. Of course I value you. I was hoping we could adjust it a little." Then would come the tears, the accusations that I was putting these ideas in his head, that I was trying to turn him against his own mother. By the end of each call, he would be exhausted and defeated, having agreed that the contract would stand as it was. He would hang up and look at me with helpless eyes. "She won't budge," he'd say. "She just gets so upset." "I know," I would say, patting his arm, playing the supportive wife. But inside, I was counting down the days. 20 days left. 15. 10. With each failed negotiation, his frustration with her grew, and his reliance on me deepened. He was starting to see that this wasn't a problem that could be solved with a reasonable conversation. He was starting to see her for the manipulator she was. My plan was working. He was slowly moving from her side of the chessboard to mine. During this time, I did some more digging. I wanted to understand the full scope of Eleanor's deception. Mark had mentioned that her justification for the payments was that she had used her inheritance to save his father's business years ago. I decided to look into that. I have a cousin who is a forensic accountant. I called him, told him a vague version of the story about a friend who needed some financial history looked into, and asked if he could discreetly find any public records about Robert's business and Eleanor's inheritance. A few days later, he called me back. "This is interesting," he said. "The business did have a rough patch about 15 years ago, but it was bailed out by a small business loan from the government, which was paid back in full within 5 years. As for the inheritance, your friend's mother-in-law did receive a substantial inheritance around that same time, but the records show it went directly into a diversified investment portfolio under her name only. It was never touched to help the business. In fact, that portfolio has grown to be worth a very, very significant amount of money. She's not just comfortable, Sarah, she's wealthy." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The entire foundation of the agreement was a lie. She hadn't sacrificed anything. She had invented a story of sacrifice to justify extorting money from her own son, all while sitting on a small fortune. The audacity, The sheer cold-blooded greed of it was breathtaking. I now had not only the legal loophole, but the moral high ground. Her entire narrative was a fraud. I decided to set the stage for the final confrontation. Eleanor's birthday was in 2 weeks. It was always a big affair, a command performance for the entire extended family where she held court as the beloved matriarch. It was the perfect venue. Her public image was everything to her. I was going to dismantle it piece by piece in front of everyone she cared about. I told Mark I thought we should host her birthday party at our house this year. As a peace offering, I said, to show her that I'm trying to be a part of the family, to respect your relationship with her. Mark was overjoyed. He saw it as a sign that I was coming around, that we were going to find a way to make it work. "That's a great idea, Sarah," he said, hugging me. "Thank you. This means a lot to me." He had no idea what it truly meant. The invitations went out. The RSVPs came in. The caterer was booked. The clock was ticking. The day of the party would be day 89. One day before the contract expired. Everything was falling into place. I felt a strange sense of calm, the quiet focus of a hunter closing in on its prey. Eleanor was about to walk into a trap she had unwittingly set for herself, and I was going to make sure the door slammed shut behind her. The day of the party dawned bright and clear. Our house was filled with the scent of flowers and catered food. I moved through the preparations with a serene focus, my mind sharp and clear. Mark was buzzing with nervous energy, desperate for the day to go well, to prove to both his mother and me that our families could coexist peacefully. He kept telling me how much he appreciated me doing this, how it showed my commitment. I just smiled and said, "I'm committed to our marriage, Mark. I'm committed to the truth." He didn't understand the double meaning. Guests began to arrive in the early afternoon. Aunts, uncles, cousins. They all greeted Eleanor with reverence, kissing her cheek and handing her lavish gifts. She was in her element, basking in the attention, playing the role of the gracious and adored matriarch to perfection. She gave me a tight, polite hug when she arrived. "Thank you for doing this, dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's so lovely to see you making an effort." "Of course, Eleanor," I replied, my smile just as polite. "Anything for family." The party went on for a couple of hours. I mingled, made small talk, and ensured everyone had a drink. All the while, I was watching the clock. I had planned this down to the minute. I waited until everyone had eaten, until the mood was relaxed and celebratory. I waited until Robert stood up to make a toast to his wife. He raised his glass. "To my wonderful wife, Eleanor," he began. "A woman who has dedicated her entire life to her family. A mother whose love and sacrifice know no bounds. We are all so lucky to have you. Happy birthday, my dear." Everyone applauded and raised their glasses. "To Eleanor," they cheered. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, a perfect picture of humble gratitude. This was my moment. I stood up, my own glass in my hand. "I'd like to make a toast as well," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Mark looked at me with a mixture of surprise and encouragement. Eleanor watched me with a wary, tight smile. "I'd like to second what Robert said," I began, my voice steady and clear. "To Eleanor, a woman of great dedication." I let the word hang in the air for a moment. In the short time I've been a part of this family, I've learned so much about the nature of love and sacrifice. In fact, Eleanor's actions at our wedding really brought it all into focus for me. A nervous murmur went through the room. Mark's smile faltered. He shot me a look that said, "Don't do this." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "When you cried out that you were losing your only son, Eleanor," I continued, looking directly at her, "I was hurt. I thought you were painting me as a villain, but I've come to realize I just misunderstood the context. You weren't speaking emotionally. You were speaking financially." Gasps rippled through the guests. Robert started to rise from his chair. "Now, Sarah, that's enough." I held up a hand. "Please let me finish. You see, what I didn't know then, and what I'm sure most of you don't know now, is that Eleanor and Mark have a business arrangement, a very formal one. I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out a folded copy of the contract. It's called the Familial Support and Legacy Agreement. In it, Mark agrees to pay his mother a monthly stipend for the rest of her life as compensation for raising him. I unfolded the paper and began to read. In recognition of the unquantifiable emotional, physical, and domestic labor. I read the key phrases, my voice ringing with clarity. Then I got to the marriage clause. The monthly stipend shall be increased by 50% to compensate for the diminution of emotional access and the increased maternal advisory burden. The room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The faces of the family members were a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. Eleanor's face had gone from pale to a blotchy, furious red. "This is a lie," she shrieked, finding her voice. "She's making this up. She's a gold-digging liar who is trying to turn my son against me." "Am I?" I asked calmly. I turned to my husband. "Mark, is this document a lie? Is that your signature at the bottom?" Mark looked like a deer in the headlights. He was trapped. The entire family was staring at him, waiting for his answer. He looked at the paper in my hand, then at his mother's furious face, then at me. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, the final breaking of a lifelong chain. He took a deep breath. "No," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "It's not a lie. I signed it." A collective gasp went through the room. Eleanor looked as if he had slapped her. "Mark, how could you?" "But that's not even the most interesting part of the story," I continued, my voice relentless. "You see, the justification for this whole agreement was a story Eleanor has told for years. A story about how she sacrificed her inheritance to save Robert's business. A noble sacrifice indeed." I paused, letting the drama build. "The only problem is, it's also a lie." I pulled out another piece of paper, the summary from my cousin, the accountant. Public records show that Robert's business was saved by a government loan, which was repaid in full. And Eleanor's inheritance? It was never touched. It was invested in a private portfolio that is now worth a very, very large amount of money. She hasn't been taking money from her son out of need. She's been taking it out of greed, all while pretending to be a martyr. The facade was not just cracked. It was obliterated. Eleanor was sputtering, trying to form words, but no sounds came out. Robert just sat there, his face ashen, looking at his wife as if for the first time. "But here's the best part," I said, delivering the final blow. I held up the contract again. "There's a special little clause in this agreement. It says that for the contract to remain valid, Mark's spouse, that's me, has to give written, notarized consent within 90 days of the wedding." I smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. Today is day 89. The deadline is tomorrow, and I am not signing. I looked directly at Eleanor, whose face had crumpled into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage and humiliation. "So, happy birthday, Eleanor. I've gotten you a gift. It's the gift of freedom. For your son. The agreement is void. The payments stop. You will not get another dime." I ripped the copy of the contract in half and let the pieces flutter to the floor. The silence in the room was deafening. Then, one of Mark's aunts, a woman who had always been kind to me, stood up. She looked at Eleanor with disgust. "Eleanor, how could you?" she asked, her voice trembling with disappointment. That broke the dam. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once. Voices rose in anger and disbelief, all directed at Eleanor. Her perfect world, her carefully constructed image, had been demolished in the space of 5 minutes. She stared at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. Then she turned and fled the room, Robert trailing helplessly behind her. Mark came to my side, his hand finding mine. He was shaking. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so, so sorry. I looked at him, at the man I had married who was finally, for the first time, standing on his own. It's okay, I said, squeezing his hand. It's over now. The party was over, but for us it felt like our life together was just beginning. The aftermath of the party was swift and brutal. The family, which had once revolved around Eleanor as its son, fractured. Phone calls flew back and forth. The story of the contract, of her lies about the inheritance, spread like wildfire. The cousins and aunts and uncles who had once adored her now viewed her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She had built her throne on a lie, and when the lie was exposed, the throne crumbled into dust. Eleanor and Robert left the party and didn't speak to anyone for days. Robert, I later learned, was having his own crisis of conscience. He had been an enabler for decades, choosing the path of least resistance, placating his wife to keep the peace. He had to face the fact that his passivity had allowed her manipulative behavior to flourish, to the point of financially and emotionally crippling their own son. Their marriage, from what I heard through the family grapevine, was in turmoil. Mark and I had our own rebuilding to do. The night of the party, after the last guest had left our now quiet house, we sat down and talked for hours. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. He told me everything, starting from his childhood. He described a lifetime of being conditioned to believe that his love was something he had to earn, something that could be revoked if he didn't meet her emotional and, eventually, financial demands. The contract was just the culmination of a lifetime of manipulation. I was a coward, he admitted, his eyes filled with shame. I was so afraid of her disapproval, of her anger, that I was willing to sacrifice our happiness to avoid it. I let her convince me that my duty to her was greater than my commitment to you. And that was wrong. I broke your trust, and I don't know if I can ever fully earn it back. We can try, I said, taking his hand. But it's not going to be easy. We need help. We need to go to therapy, both of us. You need to learn how to live without her voice in your head, and I need to learn how to trust you again. He agreed immediately. It was the first of many steps on a long road. The next day, as promised, was day 90. I had Ms. Diaz draft a formal letter to Eleanor, citing the specific clause in the contract and stating that due to the lack of spousal consent within the 90-day period, the familial support and legacy agreement was now permanently null and void. It stated that no further payments would be made and that any attempt to enforce the contract would be met with legal action. Mark and I both signed it. He sent it to his parents' house via a certified courier who required a signature upon delivery. The checkmate was complete. We started therapy the following week. It was hard. There were sessions filled with angry tears and painful truths. Mark had to unlearn 30 years of toxic conditioning. He had to learn how to set boundaries and how to see his mother's actions for what they were: abuse. I had to learn to let go of my anger and see the man he could be, not just the man he had been. A few weeks later, we got a response from Eleanor. It wasn't a letter of apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement of her wrongdoing. It was an invoice. A thick envelope arrived, and inside were dozens of pages, meticulously itemized. It was a bill for his entire childhood. It listed everything from the cost of his delivery at the hospital to the price of every birthday cake, every pair of shoes, every box of crayons. She had calculated the cost of raising him, added interest, and demanded payment in full. The total was astronomical. I stared at it in disbelief, a bitter laugh bubbling up in my throat. She was incapable of seeing what she had done. In her mind, she was still the victim, the creditor whose debt had gone unpaid. I handed the invoice to Mark, watching his face. I wanted to see his reaction. This was a test. He read the first page, his expression hardening. He flipped through the other pages, his jaw tightening with each line item. He looked at the final, absurd total at the end. He didn't say a word. He walked over to the fireplace where we had a small fire going to ward off the autumn chill. He took the thick stack of papers and without hesitation, he threw it into the flames. We stood there together, watching the pages curl and blacken, the ink of her demands turning to ash. The numbers? The false narrative of sacrifice and debt? All of it was consumed by the fire until nothing was left. He turned to me, his eyes clear and resolute in the firelight. "We're done paying," he said. A profound sense of peace settled over me. He was free. He had finally, truly chosen us. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, I knew we would walk it together, as equal partners. The trust was not fully repaired, but a new foundation was being laid, one built on honesty and shared strength. We never heard from Eleanor directly again after that. I learned from Mark's aunt that Robert had finally stood up to her. He had given her an ultimatum, therapy, and a sincere apology to Mark and me, or he was leaving. She refused. Robert, true to his word, moved out. He started his own therapy and began the slow process of rebuilding a relationship with his son, a relationship based on respect, not obligation. Eleanor was left alone in her big house, isolated by her own greed and pride. She had lost her son, her husband, and the respect of her entire family. She had cashed in all her relationships for a contract that was now worthless, leaving her with nothing but her money and her bitterness. Our life, on the other hand, began to flourish. With the money that was no longer being siphoned off, we were able to save and buy our first home a year later. It was a modest house, but it was ours, built on love and truth. Mark thrived in his new freedom, becoming more confident, more relaxed, more the man I had first fallen in love with. The shadow of his mother no longer loomed over us. Sometimes, I think about that invoice she sent, that pathetic, detailed accounting of a mother's love. It was a perfect symbol of her worldview, that everything has a price, that love is a transaction. But as I look at my life with Mark now, I know the truth. The most valuable things in life, trust, respect, true partnership, are the things that can never be bought or sold. Some debts are not meant to be paid. They are meant to be erased. And in the ashes of that ridiculous bill, we found our true beginning.